So this summer, a team and I are attempting to row the Northwest Passage. That is the Arctic route that links the Atlantic to the Pacific. And if we achieve it in a single summer, that'll be a world first. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Instead, I'm going to focus on 2 attempts to row across the Atlantic, both of which I failed. Now at this point, you're probably wondering, why? Not why would somebody want to row across an ocean. You're probably asking yourself, why have I given up my afternoon to listen to somebody who hasn't? And that's a good question. Our society, our culture doesn't value stories of failure. We'd rather hear some epic story of success. But who here has failed? A few hands going up. I bet all of us, to some degree or another, have experienced failure. It's this great, big, shared experience that very few of us talk about and very few of us value. Well, these 2 failures were hugely valuable for me, hugely formative. I learned a great deal about human resilience I hope to share with you today. So if that's why, the next question is what? What does it mean to row across the Atlantic? Well, the typical route is from the Canary Islands off the west coast of Africa, 3,000 miles to the Caribbean. You row for 2 hours, you sleep for 2 hours. You row for 2 hours, you sleep for 2 hours. You row for 2 hours, you sleep for 2 hours, you row for 2 hours, you sleep for 2 hours, all day, all night, for over a month. It's unsupported, so you carry your own food, you make your water with a desalinator, and yes, we go to the loo in front of each other. So if that's the plan, I needed a crew. So I scoured the internet for somebody to join me, and I found a stranger who posted that he needed a crew of 10 people to set the world record, which immediately caught my imagination. Now, usually, finding a stranger on the internet is a bad idea. But in this case, it was a terrible idea. A couple of red flags, so I gave him a proper Google, and I found articles going back to the 90s, a bit like this one. Captain Calamity's latest rowing bid wiped out by a wave. Well, I was expecting a wave or 2. But at this point, I was already so emotionally invested, let alone financially invested, that I was happy to rationalize away anything that didn't confirm that we were going to set the world record. This was just journalists trying to shift newspaper, headline-grabbing, clickbait journalists. An amazing delusion, given I am a journalist. It set the precedent. I was happy to rationalize away a number of red flags that we all saw as a crew, until finally the day came where we departed shore. Despite these misgivings, the day we pulled out from the harbour was immense. This weight just lifted off my shoulders, and I realized the simplicity of what we were about to embark on. No emails, deadlines, no existential crises about what you're doing with your life, no bosses, just get from A to B. Simple. So the first 2 days went great. Then into the second night, a storm kicked up around us, and these huge swells are rolling in. Now swells aren't like waves. Swells are these mountains of water that roll in from 1,000 miles away across the Atlantic. And by the time they reached us, they towered over our small ocean rowing boat. When you're in between 2 of these mountains, it's pitch black, and not dark in the sense that there's a lack of light. It felt to me like the surface of the water was sucking the light out of the air, making it even darker. And then in the next minute, you slowly move onto the top of the oncoming swell. As far as you can see, these watery mountains are rolling towards you. And the moon, when it's the only light, is so bright it casts a shadow behind each of us. And it was exciting and exhilarating, but not in an adrenaline rush kind of way. I felt this immense contentment. This is what I'd signed up for. To be in the midst of nature in all its power, moving under my own power, was amazing. But that contentment didn't mean I was oblivious to what was going on around me. And what was going on around me was the boat was utterly unseaworthy. The red flags that we'd chosen to ignore were coming to fruition. In particular, the back cabins, they weren't watertight. The waves were coming over the back and filling them up. So the guys who were sleeping in them were rowing for 2 hours and sleeping in 2 or 3 inches of water. It was sapping their energy. They were getting hypothermic. One guy in particular, his condition was deteriorating. And because of this boat, the trust we put in Captain Calamity, we had to call for a helicopter in the morning. And just a few hours after sunrise, he came to pick us up. I dismissed those Captain Calamity headlines as journalists trying to get clicks. And now, barely 40 or so hours into our expedition, and I was in a Captain Calamity headline. But I was undeterred. I still wanted to row the Atlantic. So 2 years of planning, 2 years of raising sponsorship, and a crewmate and I cast off, this time in a pair. When the day came for us to park shore, it wasn't like the first time with that moment of catharsis. In fact, I felt overwhelmed. The first ordeal, then 2 years of planning, finally coming together. I caught eyes with my mum as I pulled out of the harbour, and I just started to cry. It took a while to settle in, but come the third night, everything was coming together. My crewmate was asleep just after sunset, so I was on deck by myself in the darkness. I've heard runners talking about being in the flow state, where their running feels effortless. I think I was in the flow state that night. The harder I pulled, the faster we went, and the easier it felt. The oars felt like extensions of my arms moving through the water. It felt like silk. The wind was behind us. Our speed was creeping up, so I started to think about the mixed pair world record. The stars were so bright they came all the way down to the horizon, like I was in the middle of this massive starry snow globe. And again, a contentment just washed over me. This is what I signed up for. This is where I wanted to be. But my crewmate came out the cabin and she was having a panic attack. And when it continued, to her eternal credit and eternal bravery, she had the self-awareness to realize that if she continued on, perhaps it'd be dangerous. So we called for a boat to come pick her up, and I was determined to go on by myself and row the Atlantic solo. But over the 24 hours or so it took for the boat to get there, I got inside my own head. I began to question whether or not it was sensible. In particular, we were having problems with the battery. That caused part of our panic attack. It wasn't charging. Was I crossing the objective risk of rowing the Atlantic solo into the reckless risk of rowing the Atlantic solo without a functioning battery, and therefore I should get off? Or was I just so overwhelmed by the idea of rowing the Atlantic solo, I was looking for a reason to get off? That turmoil spun in me as the support boat got quicker and quicker and closer, until finally it came to pick her up, and I got off as well. But the turmoil didn't end. I questioned that decision every single hour, for every single day, for months and months. I wanted to be Mark the adventurer. Now I wasn't that. Who was I? Pathetic. That's what my internal monologue told me. Pathetic. I wanted to be like Ernest Shackleton, who survived on the Antarctic sea ice, or Janine Barrett, who overcame so many barriers to be the first woman to sail around the world, and Mark Agnew, one obstacle, giving up, taking the excuse. Pathetic. I felt so much of my self-esteem had become locked up in this ridiculous abstract idea of being an adventurer, that now that I wasn't, I was worthless. Even just normal drinks with friends, I'd feel half a beat off the banter and return to these intense conversations, and then the next morning I'd re-examine those conversations and think, oh, my friend, she's sick of me. So little self-worth, I couldn't even imagine my friends seeing worth in me. Began to get in fights with my other half, in trouble at work, just completely, utterly unmotivated. And then when COVID hit, that was layered with guilt because I felt so self-indulgent for feeling pathetic when people were actually going through real trauma. But after a while, I realized that I was going to have to do something to drag myself out of this hole. I couldn't wait time to heal this wound. So I started obsessively researching about resilience. And the first thing that struck me was resilience is about perspective. It's about having memories to draw on. I overcame that, I can overcome this. If I reframed my first failure, I bounced back immediately. I wanted to get back on the boat, and I started planning the next expedition. That was a sign of resilience, and just knowing that brought my life back onto an even keel, slightly. But what struck me as more profound was resilience can be trained. It is a skill. It is a mental strength, and all strength can be trained. If you want bigger, stronger muscles, you lift weights until they get sore, they get under stress, they rip, and they grow back stronger. Well, why couldn't I do the same for my mind? So I set out a series of challenges. I was living in Hong Kong at the time, and I ran 100 kilometers across the mountains. I rode around Hong Kong Island. I ran across the mountains of Hong Kong Island, and I kayaked out to countless deserted beaches. Every time there was a knee pain or problem with the boat or unexpected weather, it wasn't just adversity, it was an opportunity for me to get used to adversity and be more resilient for next time. I took a boat out at 8 p.m. and I rowed up and down a 2-kilometre strip for 12 hours straight in the dark by myself. Of course, it was physically difficult, but being by myself with no stimulus in the dark, it was so boring. And that boredom was a stressor I was putting on myself to grow and be more resilient. And resilience isn't just important in these arbitrary challenges, but in all life. And my life began to become back onto an even keel. The self-loathing dissipated. Just in time for me to apply and join this Northwest Passage crew. This summer, we'll row from Pond Inlet to Point Barrow. The only reason it's possible is because climate change is getting rid of the sea ice, so it's open for longer and longer each year. But there's still a huge amount of variables, which might mean we don't succeed no matter how well trained or experienced we are. In particular, the sea ice might return, and there's no way you can row through that. But I'm now resilient enough to deal with that adversity and uncertainty. And if we fail, I'm now resilient enough to deal with the feelings that I might have in the event of failure. But is that what I want? Just to be resilient enough to suffer well if I don't succeed? It doesn't seem like a very sustainable way to approach these things. So I started researching again. This time, I came across an article by 2 psychologists, Katrina Douglas and David Careless, and they talk about the narratives sports people tell themselves for the reason they take part in sport. The stories we tell ourselves are important, and according to them, there's 3. Performance, discovery, and relationships. Performance is just about the binary nature of sport. Win, loss. That's what I've become obsessed with. Never thought about world record or world first before, but all of my self-esteem and all of my goals were caught in this. Row the Atlantic, success. Don't row the Atlantic, failure. Set the world record, success. Set a world first, success. Don't set a world first, don't set a world record, failure. There is no grey area there. There's only binary, and with it, my self-esteem was caught up in those binary outcomes. But what about the others? Discovery is about using your sport to expose yourself to new experiences. That's why I wanted to row the Atlantic in the first place, to see nature from this incredible new vantage point. And looking back, even on the few days I spent out there, those were the powerful, impactful moments where I felt immersed in nature. Relationships, that was another core motivation. I wanted to get to the other side, look my teammates in the eye and say, we did something special together. I don't know when I've forgotten that and become obsessed with these ridiculous world records. But if resilience can be learned, surely I could learn these narratives, or in my case, relearn them. So I went out and I kayaked around Mull, the island on the west coast of Scotland. I had no particular aim or time frame or anything except immersion in nature. I was relearning, repracticing, discovery. I sailed to the Shetland Islands off the north coast of Scotland. This time it was just with my dad. Not a headline-grabbing adventure, but 2 weeks alone with somebody special to me was all about relationships. I rowed from Newcastle to Orkney with my Northwest Passage crew. We didn't have performance in mind. I focused on immersion. I focused on building relationships with this new crew. And lo and behold, without any peer pressure, the performance followed. So how does that link to human resilience? Well, now I'm immune to failure. If I get through the Northwest Passage, success. If I don't get through the Northwest Passage, but I have an immersive experience and discover the Arctic from this amazing vantage point, success. If I don't get through the Northwest Passage, but I build relationships for life, success. Having a range of motivations that you clearly articulate to yourself, that are both internal and external, frees you from failure. I'm now free from failure because I'm free to judge success on my own terms. Thank you very much.